course, we like everyone else like to see high wages, but we also want to see them not eaten up by high inflation, and that's really what we're trying to do is to cool the economy and work with what's happening on the supply side to bring the economy back to 2% inflation. Part of that will probably be having wage increases move down incrementally toward levels that are more sustainable.
Holding rates steady at a restrictive rate to try to slow and cool the economy and inflation. Thank you.
I wouldn't say that, no. I mean, the active tool of monetary policy is, of course, interest rates, and this is a plan we've long had in place to slow, really not in order to provide accommodation to the economy, but to be less restrictive to the economy. It really is to ensure that the process of shrinking the balance sheet down to where we want to get it is a smooth one. It doesn't wind up with financial market turmoil the way it did the last time we did this, and the only other time we've ever done this. And we're not on that road. We're on the road where we're serving all the American people and making our decisions based on the data and how those data affect the outlook and the balance of risks.
And then, is there a significant difference between, whether you start in, say, September versus December?
There's a significant difference between an institution that takes into account all sorts of political events and one that doesn't. That's where the significant difference is, and we just don't do that. I mean, you can go back and read the transcripts for every. This is my fourth presidential election here. Read all the transcripts and see if anybody mentions in any way the pending election. It just isn't part of our thinking. It's not what we're hired to do. If we start down that road, I don't know how you stop. So let me start by saying that the Fed is committed to completing this process and carrying out Basel III Endgame in a way that's faithful to Basel and also comparable to what the other large comparable jurisdictions are doing. We haven't made any decisions on policy or on process at all. Nothing. No decisions have been made. I'll say again, though, if we conclude that reproposal is appropriate, we won't hesitate to insist on that.
Does a period of more divergent global economic trajectories and central bank policies present for the FOMC?
So that you're right. I think that may happen, and you know that we all serve domestic mandates, right? So I think the difference between the United States and other countries that are now considering rate cuts is that they're just not having the kind of growth we're having. They have their inflation is performing about like ours or maybe a little better, but they're not experiencing the kind of growth we're experiencing. So we actually have the luxury of having strong growth and a strong labor market, very low unemployment, high job creation, and all of that. And we can be patient, and we'll be careful and cautious as we approach the decision to cut rates. Whereas I think other jurisdictions may go before that. In terms of the implications, I think obviously markets see it coming. It's priced in now, and so I think the markets and economies can adapt to it. And I think we haven't seen, in addition for the emerging market economies, we haven't seen the kind of turmoil that was more frequent 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And that's, I think, partly because emerging market countries, many of them have much better monetary policy frameworks, much more credibility on inflation. And so they're navigating this pretty well this time. Let me address cuts. So obviously, our decisions that we make on our policy rate are going to depend on the incoming data, how the outlook is evolving, and the balance of risks, as always. And we'll look at the totality of the data. So I think, and we think, that policy is well positioned to address different paths that the economy might take. And we've said that we don't think it would be appropriate to dial back our restrictive policy stance until we've gained greater confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably toward 2%. So, for example, let me take a path. If we did have a path where inflation proves more persistent than expected and where the labor market remains strong, but inflation is moving sideways and we're not gaining greater confidence, well, that would be a case in which it could be appropriate to hold off on rate cuts. I think there's also other paths that the economy could take which would cause us to want to consider rate cuts, and those would be two of those paths would be that we we do gain greater confidence, as we've said, that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%. And another path could be, an unexpected weakening in the labor market, for example. So those are paths in which you could see us cutting rates. So I think it really will depend on the data. In terms of peak rate, I think really it's the same question. I think the data will have to answer that question for us.
But could you just follow on the path where you might not cut? Is that you mentioned that it would be inflation persistent? Is inflation, would that be the key data in making that decision, or could you expand a bit more on that? Thank you.
Again, we've set ourselves a test that for us to begin to reduce policy restriction, we'd want to be confident that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%. And for sure, one of the things we'd be looking at is the performance of inflation. We'd also be looking at inflation expectations. We'd be looking at the whole story, but clearly incoming inflation data would be at the very heart of that decision.
Employment is about 4%. It feels a lot like a steady state, and we have 3% inflation. So if the data remains the same that you're seeing, and I know you said you don't see a rate hike, but it stands to reason that you would need a rate hike to get from 3 to 2% inflation. So was there any discussion about a rate hike in today's meeting? And are you satisfied with 3% inflation for the rest of the year?
Well, of course, we're not satisfied with 3% inflation. 3% can't be in a sentence with satisfied. So we will return inflation to 2% over time, but over time. And we think our policy stance is appropriate to do that. So if we were to conclude that policy is not sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2%, then that would be what it would take for us to want to increase rates. We don't see that. We don't see evidence for that. So that's where we are.
Was there a discussion about a rate hike at all?
So the policy focus has really been on what to do about holding the current level of restriction. That's part of the policy. That's where the policy discussion was in the meeting.
I wanted to follow on the 3%. Is there a time frame of persistent inflation that would trigger a rate hike?
There isn't any rule. You can't look to a rule. These are going to be judgment calls. Clearly, restrictive monetary policy needs more time to do its job. That is pretty clear based on what we're seeing. How long that will take and how patient we should be, it's going to depend on the totality of the data, how the outlook evolves. We need to be more confident, and we've said, my colleagues and I today said, that we didn't see progress in the first quarter, and I've said that it appears then that it's going to take longer for us to reach that point of confidence. So I don't know how long it'll take. I can just say that when we get that confidence, then rate cuts will be in scope, and I don't know exactly when that will be.
And with hindsight, are there any signs that you can look back on now, looking at the reports from January or February or March, that suggested something more worrying than just expected bumpiness?
Not really. So I thought it was appropriate to reserve judgment until we had the full quarter's data, until we saw the March data. And so take a step back. What do we now see in the first quarter? We see strong economic activity. We see a strong labor market, and we see inflation. We see 3 inflation readings. So I think you're at a point there where you should take some signal. We don't like to react to 1 or 2 months' data, but this is a full quarter, and I think it's appropriate to take signal now, and we are taking signal. And the signal that we're taking is that it's likely to take longer for us to gain confidence that we are on a sustainable path down to 2% inflation. That's the signal that we're taking. So I think it's unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike. I'd say it's unlikely. Our policy focus is really what I just mentioned, which is how long to keep policy restrictive. You ask, what would it take? I think we'd need to see persuasive evidence that our policy stance is not sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2% over time. That's not what we think we're seeing, as I mentioned. But that's something like that is what it would take. We'd look at the totality of the data, answer to that question. That would include inflation expectations, and all the other data too. Well, I think, again, the test, what I'm saying is if we were to come to that conclusion that policy weren't tight enough to achieve that, so it would be the totality of all the things we'd be looking at. It could be expectations, it could be a combination of things, but if we reach that conclusion and we don't see evidence supporting that conclusion, that's what it would take, I think, for us to take that step.
Welcome to the Crypto Teacher. And you know I come back with that video just to make you think.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
And make sure you're joining the Patrons. If you're not a part of the Patrons, make sure you're hitting the Cash App. And we had Jerome Powell in the house today. And it was a pretty good meeting. He gave the truth, not the whole truth, but he did give us some truth. They're trying to slow down the economy. And we know the economy is at a screeching halt. And inflation is hitting the consumers, not just here in America, but globally. But remember, they want to keep rates higher for longer in order to destroy the economy. So therefore, the fourth industrial revolution can rise. Guys, never forget the goal. And Jerome Powell stated he's not worried about the elections. And we know that's definitely not correct. They're just holding this thing up until we get to voting, and then they're going to start pulling down the curtain and wake the sheep up, because we know mass layoffs are coming. And he talked about Basel III, and Basel III is going to get rid of these small and medium-sized banks due to capital requirements, because in a digital economy, you have to have plenty of liquidity. It's real-time settlement. These small and medium-sized banks can't survive. That means small businesses can't survive. That means universal basic income is right around the corner. That's why they're pushing stable coins. So therefore, you have UBI, universal basic income, that sit at home and do nothing. But little do the people know, this is biblical. They'll be able to tell you what, when, and how to buy, and you have 3 to 6 months to spend it, or poof, it's gone. And blockchain gives the NWO the all CNI. They'll know you better than you know yourself, and they can shut you off tomorrow. And remember, the crypto teacher told you. And this 2% inflation goal is there for a reason, because we know when it comes to this inflation, it's all corporate greed. They can lower down to 2% tomorrow, but remember, we only have a handful of corporations that own everything. They just have different names. The illusion of choice. And remember, this is the same Jerome Powell last year in the fourth quarter and stated there will be rate cuts. And remember, the bond market reacted, stock market all-time highs. And what did a crypto teacher tell you? It wasn't true. And what happened? We're not getting those rate cuts. And we know the crypto teacher gives you the truth, nothing but the truth. Yes, the truth hurts, but it sets you free. But when you give people the truth, they hate you. But remember, I'm just a watchman on the wall. But we will get rate cuts, but we know that distraction has to come, because the economy clearly needs it. But remember, they only need that one crisis in order to bring in the machines. The machines are ready. This digital economy is ready. All they need is that crisis. Because remember, during a crisis, you can do things you never would have been able to do. And remember, guys, the fourth industrial revolution is a plan. It's a global plan. So it moves in phases. It's going to take about 3 to 5 years, but it moves in phases. But the phase that we're in right now is to crush the global economy. And remember, the crypto teacher told you, because he knows. When it comes to the NWO, it's all planned out. You have a wonderful day.
We saw a year of very high productivity growth in 2023. And we saw a year of, I think, negative productivity growth in 2022. So I think it's hard to draw from the data. The question is, will productivity run? There are two questions. One is, will productivity run, persistently above its longer run trend? I don't think we know that. In terms of potential output, though, if that's a separate question. We've had what amounts to a significant increase in the potential output of the economy. That's not about productivity. It was about having more labor, frankly, both through in 2023, both through participation, also through immigration. So we're very much like other forecasters and economists, getting our arms around what that means for potential output this year and next year, and last year for that matter too. So I think in that case, I think you really do have a significant increase in potential output. But you've also got more supply. But those people also come in. They work. They have jobs. They spend. So you've also got demand. So it may be that you get more supply than you get demand at the beginning. But ultimately, it should be neither inflationary nor disinflationary over a longer period.
Well, you said earlier that at this point you're not really considering rate increases. If growth is higher, but you're not considering rate increases, does that imply that you're more worried about causing the economy to slow too much than you are about inflation taking off again?
No, I think we believe our policy stance is in a good place and is appropriate to the current situation. We believe it's restrictive, and our evidence for that I went over earlier. You see it in the labor market, you see it in inflation-sensitive spending, where demand has clearly come down a lot over the past few years, and that's more from monetary policy, whereas the supply side things that are happening are more on the supply side. So that's how I would think about it.
Consider the current policy rate still. You confident that it's sufficiently restrictive to get inflation back to 2%?
So I do think the evidence shows pretty clearly that policy is restrictive and is weighing on demand, and there are a few places I would point to for that. You can start with the labor market. So demand is still strong, the demand side of the labor market in particular, but it's cooled from its extremely high level of a couple of years ago. And you see that in job openings. You saw it, more evidence of that today in the JOLTS report, as you'll know. It's still higher than pre-pandemic, but it has been coming down both in the Indeed report and in the JOLTS report. That's demand cooling. The same is true of quits and hiring rates, which have essentially normalized. I also look at surveys of workers and surveys of workers and businesses, and ask workers, are jobs plentiful, and ask businesses, are workers plentiful? Is it easy to find workers? And you've seen that the answers to those have come back down to pre-pandemic levels. You also see in interest-sensitive spending like housing and investment, you also see that higher interest rates are weighing on those activities. So I do think it's clear that policy is restrictive. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. The economy has made considerable progress toward our dual mandate objectives. Inflation has eased substantially over the past year, while the labor market has remained strong. And that's very good news. But inflation is still too high. Further progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain. We are fully committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal. Restoring price stability is essential to achieve a sustainably strong labor market that benefits all. Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings, though at a slower pace. Our restrictive stance of monetary policy has been putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation, and the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance over the past year. However, in recent months, inflation has shown a lack of further progress toward our 2% objective, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. Although GDP growth moderated from 3.4% in the fourth quarter of last year to 1.6% in the first quarter, private domestic final purchases, which excludes inventory investment, government spending, and net exports, and usually sends a clearer signal on underlying demand, was 3.1% in the first quarter, as strong as the second half of 2023. Consumer spending has been robust over the past several quarters, even as high interest rates have weighed on housing and equipment investment. Improving supply conditions have supported resilient demand and the strong performance of the U.S. economy over the past year. The labor market remains relatively tight, but supply and demand conditions have come into better balance. Payroll job gains averaged 276,000 jobs per month in the first quarter, while the unemployment rate remains low at 3.8%. Strong job creation over the past year has been accompanied by an increase in the supply of workers, reflecting increases in participation among individuals aged 25 to 54 years and a continued strong pace of immigration. Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year and the jobs-to-workers gap has narrowed, but labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation has eased notably over the past year, but remains above our longer-run goal of 2%. Total PCE prices rose 2.7% over the 12 months ending in March. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8%. The inflation data received so far this year have been higher than expected. Although some measures of short-term inflation expectations have increased in recent months, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. The committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings, though at a slower pace. Over the past year, as labor market tightness has eased, and inflation has declined, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance. The economic outlook is uncertain, however, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. We've stated that we do not expect that it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. So far this year, the data have not given us that greater confidence. In particular, and as I noted earlier, readings on inflation have come in above expectations. It is likely that gaining such greater confidence will take longer than previously expected. We are prepared to maintain the current target range for the federal funds rate for as long as appropriate. We're also prepared to respond to an unexpected weakening in the labor market. We know that reducing policy restraint too soon or too much could result in a reversal of the progress we've seen on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Policy is well positioned to deal with the risks and uncertainties that we face in pursuing both sides of our dual mandate. We will continue to make decisions meeting by meeting. Turning to our balance sheet, the committee decided at today's meeting to slow the pace of decline in our securities holdings, consistent with the plans we released previously. Specifically, the cap on Treasury redemptions will be lowered from the current $60 billion per month to $25 billion per month as of June 1. Consistent with the committee's intention to hold primarily Treasury securities in the longer run, we're leaving the cap on agency securities unchanged per month, and we will reinvest any proceeds in excess of this cap in Treasury securities. With principal payments on agency securities currently running at about $15 billion per month, total portfolio runoff will amount to roughly $40 billion per month. The decision to slow the pace of runoff does not mean that our balance sheet will ultimately shrink by less than it would otherwise, but rather allows us to approach its ultimate level more gradually. In particular, slowing the pace of runoff will help ensure a smooth transition, reducing the possibility that money markets experience stress and thereby facilitating the ongoing decline in our securities holdings that are consistent with reaching the appropriate level of ample reserves. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Going to a different economy, and we're going to be learning more about that as we go, but clearly we're learning that things can be done from remote locations. We're learning that technology can replace people even more than we thought.
We're not going back to the same economy. We're recovering, but to a different economy, and it'll be one that is more leveraged to technology. And I worry that that is going to make it even more difficult than it was for many workers.
In Silicon Valley, and my friends who work in technology know that what we did to the manufacturing workers, we are now going to do to the retail workers, the call center workers, the fast food workers, the truck drivers, and then even bookkeepers, accountants, insurance agents, lawyers, and on through the economy. So what happened to the manufacturing workers is a very clear sign.
And so we'll import Chinese-based CBDC technology. So it's going to be CBDC in a box provided to you by the People's Bank of China.
But every stock, every bond, every currency, every commodity, every piece of art, every private business, every piece of real estate will eventually be a token on a blockchain, an entry on a ledger, permanent and immutable. We will have truth instead of trust, and we will save over $7 trillion a year. 6 to 8% of global GDP is wasted by the friction of the trust industry that's necessary when you have dual entry accounting. With triple entry accounting, which is what a blockchain is, we get rid of all of that friction. It's a beautiful future.
Like what you see in China and their social credit scoring systems, right? If we get identity wrong, it could be a tool to enslave humanity. And if we get it right, it could be a tool to liberate humanity. And as an American, I'm obviously rooting for the one that's on the side of freedom.
Bitcoin is an international asset. And also, I do believe the role of crypto is, it's digitizing gold.
I actually believe this technology is going to be very important. Look at it. We have been part of the huge revolution in investing through ETFs. We believe that ETFs will be changing the whole way we invest. Many people still use it as a means, people are investing it for indexing. No, the majority of people who are putting money in in ETFs are active investors that are buying exposure. The entire bond market is being transformed as we talk right now. I believe the next generation for markets, the next generation for securities will be tokenization of securities. And if we can have that distributed ledger that we know every beneficial owner, every beneficial seller, we all have our code of who's buying, who's selling, instantaneous settlement. And think about it, it changes the whole ecosystem.
Chinese bank ICBC has been hit by a ransomware attack, and the U.S. Treasury market, as a result of that, has been disrupted. This, according to the Financial Times. We're getting more right now with Bloomberg's Shonali Bassick. Shonali, what do we know?
Listen, we have the Financial Times now reporting that ICBC, one of China's largest banks here, was hit with a ransomware attack. And remember, they're a very significant intermediary in the Treasury market. The SIFMA has told its members that this has been part of the reason here that the system is kind of clogged up, if you will, during that auction that we saw a little bit before. The attack had prevented ICBC, according to the Financial Times, from settling Treasury trades on behalf of other market participants. A large executive at a major bank also telling the paper that such a large party on the fixed income clearing corp creates major concerns, potentially impacting the liquidity of Treasury markets.
Now, it was not just a poor auction. It was absolutely lousy, and when the dealers have to step in to save a Treasury auction, that's a rare occurrence.
I hate when countries go off the dollar. I would not allow countries to go off the dollar, because when we lose that standard, that will be like losing a revolutionary war. That will be a hit to our country, just like losing a war. And we can't let that happen. And too many countries now are fighting to get off the dollar.
Crypto Teacher and the New World Order book plus the 3 kids books. It's time to re-educate. Also, new to cryptos, Coinbase, Bitrue, Binance. Do not forget book links and crypto links are in the description. The stock channel, guys. Don't forget to go like, subscribe, spread everywhere. You have your Kobo, your chip stocks, your banking, your gaming. While everybody's sitting at home, get home stocks, the Xrp, the biotech stocks. And while everybody's at home wishing they were still getting that free money, what are they doing? Drinking and smoking weed. Don't forget about those stocks, and you have a wonderful day. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation to come. Steve Jobs. And guys, you know I truly believe in this. When you look at the New World Order, they're the storytellers. And that's the reason why I wrote my New World Order book. But guys, now it's time to change the current generation. And I wrote 3 kids books. You know I love the Trinity because I understand the power that's in it. So I have 3 books. We have an opportunity to change the generation, to educate, not just me, but I want to show you that I take action on a daily basis. And I want you to take action on a daily basis. Whether it's your job, whether it's in your community, we have an opportunity right now to educate the masses. I posted this on my Twitter account. Please share, but this is a short clip of the 3 books. There's going to be a clothing line and action figures. Please get these books for your kids, nephews, cousins, friends, so therefore we can start the re-education now. Because as we see, the 4th Industrial Revolution foundation is definitely here. Robots, algorithms, drones, taking humanity out the picture. We have to re-educate. But let's get into the video.
Part 1. King Joshua and Grandma Tam save the village. Part 2. King Joshua and Grandma Tam save New York from COVID stories 3. Part 3. King Joshua and Grandma Tam goes to China.
It's mandatory to get part 1, part 2, and part 3 of this series. It's time to re-educate Generation Z.